Hey guys, Adam here. I'm going to be doing some improvements to my desktop computer. Basically, it sits in my bedroom, it runs a lot at night because I render videos for my YouTube channels, and basically it's kind of noisy, the temperature's been running high, and I want to do some overclocking on it as well. Currently it has a Core i7-3770K in it, 16 gigabytes of RAM. I'm not really going to be doing any upgrades to the hardware. I'm happy with the hardware. I don't really see any reason to upgrade any of that right now. But what I do want to upgrade is some of the case and the cooling and a few other things while we're at it. So I have a Corsair Carbide 330R case here. I have two Noctua 140mm fans, a couple of 120, this smaller 40mm fan, which I'll show you what that's going to go to later. An Intel network interface card, because I like to use Intel cards and everything. It doesn't actually have an Intel card in it right now. It has like the built-in Atheros or whatever, and that thing actually crashes under heavy load. It seems like sometimes I just lose my connection. Sometimes it doesn't happen on any of my other computers, so I suspect that it's the network interface on the motherboard. I have a new cooler, which is probably the most important part, because the CPU's been running kind of hot and I want to get that temperature down, so we'll see what difference that makes. This is really just for convenience. I picked this up on eBay. It's just I don't even think it's actually a hot swap drive bay, but it's a SATA drive. You can swap the drive out. You pretty much just pull this and the drive housing comes out. I want to have that for some backup solutions that I have. I have a few extra drive sleds for that. Make backups a little bit easier to do. So that's what we're going to be utilizing out of new parts for this machine, and then we'll go ahead and get the old parts out and take a look at those. Alright, so just taking a look at the front of the case, it's got this plastic. It's meant to look like brushed aluminum. I guess the front panel is reversible, so it can be swung the other way. I'll have to look into how that works exactly. I'm looking at the hinges there, and it's not immediately obvious, but we'll figure that out. It's got a front dust cover, 140mm fan spots. I'm going to go ahead and actually swap those out with some Noctua fans, but that's a good fan that's already in there. But I want to go with something a little higher end. 3 drive bays, and then we have our power button, reset button, audio, and 2 USB 3 ports. I kind of wish that those were USB 2 ports, because I have a few devices that actually crash Windows when I try to use them on USB 3 ports, even though they're supposed to be backwards compatible. It seems like the support isn't all there. Alright, so looking at the back of the case, we have a spot for a 120mm fan, some spots for if you want to have punch outs for water cooling, a full ATX board, ventilation, and then a spot for the power supply. There's a lot of room for cable management here, so, and it looks like they even have good tie downs here. It looks like these are just fan headers here. All the umbilicals from the front are there. Pull the side off. The sides are good. They're not overly flexible. They have sound deadening material on the inside. It gives it a quality feeling. And here in the front, you can see it's pretty open here. There's no drive bays. That's so that we get better ventilation. And then we have, it looks like 4 toolless 3.5-inch drive bays here. And it looks like they can mount SSDs as well, which you'd expect. And let's see what we have for our accessories. Looks like they give us 4 zip ties. That's very generous of them. There's a bunch of black screws. Looks like motherboard screws, fan screws, those sort of things, and nothing else. Apparently there's no instructions with this, not that you really particularly need them. These are toolless 5.25-inch drive bays as well, so it's a toolless case, which is always good. And I guess that pretty much is the overview of this case. Looking forward to getting started on a build in it. Like I said, I don't think, is there a header on this? I like it when they put the header on here so you can use it as USB 2 as well. But it doesn't look like there is. Yeah, that's audio. Yeah, so just USB 3. Some cases, I know that my Antec ones usually come with a little breakout header here, so you can use this as a USB 2 port if you wish. Alright, so we're going to get started by, I already switched the door. It was actually fairly simple. There's just these little clips here. You push those in and that's what holds the tension on either side. So we're going to get started by replacing these two front fans. Let's go ahead. Well, I guess there's only one fan installed right now, but we're going to go ahead and put them in. Can I reach screws on that without taking the front drive? I don't think they put screws in up at the top, I'm hoping. I can't quite see those screw holes, so I'm hoping they did not decide to put screws in there, because I'll be sad if they did. And they, of course, did. So, how does this front panel come off? Cool. And now we can get to the work here on the front. I always do like cases that have an integrated power switch and stuff, so it's not attached to the front face. It's very irritating when you take that off and there's all these wires hanging off of it and stuff, so glad to see that. Let's go ahead and pop this fan out. They put all 4 screws in. You don't usually see people do that. No, I lost a screw. Oh well. I'll find it. The screws are barely... Look at the threads on that. They barely go through. Let's fish this wire through. Alright, so this is a good fan, but like I said, we're not going to use it. We're going to do something a little bit higher end. Corsair fans are fine, I'm sure, but I want to do all Noctua fans on this build, so I'm going to go ahead and get those fans out. So always remember when you're working on fans, there'll be a mark usually. This shows that the fan rotates this way, air goes that way, and you can always remember the hub, the stationary part of the hub goes towards the front. This part, well, it goes towards the airflow, and then this part goes in the opposite direction of the airflow. So let's go ahead and figure this mounting out here. I guess I'll do the bottom one first. It doesn't really matter, I suppose, if they're upside down or not. And I'm just reusing the same screws. So this will just be a moment. Alright, so we got our 2 front fans mounted. I'm just going to run the 2 wires together here. I don't know if I have enough, I think I do have enough system fan ports on my motherboard for these, but I'm just going to run them together anyway. So they're hooked up to this Y connector here, and then that will possibly need an extension to go back to the board. If it needs an extension, I'll probably just split them each off onto their own extension cord and plug that. I think I have like 4 or 5 system fan slots on this board, so I'll probably be alright with that. So I'm going to go ahead and pull the back fan and get a 120 mounted back there now too. So whenever you're putting in anything that has multiple screws, like a power supply, really anything, a fan, it's good practice to just start the screws in all 4 holes or however many holes there are, just so that you know that they will all begin threading, and then you go ahead and tighten them down. Something I learned working on cars. It's really difficult to move stuff sometimes if you don't do it this way. So just try to make sure that you start each corner and then tighten everything down. Alright, so we need to pop these bays out. We're going to use all 3 actually. I think there's clips on the inside. And set those aside somewhere so that if I ever want to replace anything, I have these available still. So the first one we're going to work on here, because the other drives are still in my computer, is going to be this SATA drive. And as far as these go, I think you just pull this tab on the side here. And the drive should pretty much just go where it wants to go, and then we lock it down. We can add screws too. I probably will actually add screws because there's still wobble and I don't like that. So I think I'll probably add screws, at least on one side, probably on the other 2. I generally like to add screws does this close with that semi-bulbous thing there? Yes, it does. Cool. So I'm going to go ahead and get the other computer out. There's not really anything else we can do on this until we strip some parts from the other one. So looking at the front, this is a Cooler Master case. It's been an alright case. It's just a little bit on the small side. It's an Elite, of course, a Cooler Master Elite. I don't know the model number exactly, but it's been a good case. I've not really had too many problems with it. It doesn't have any dust filters, so it's really, really dirty on the inside. I blew out the dust probably last month, and it's already full again. I got a CD burner and a Blu-ray drive. I actually do still use optical discs, so I'll be carrying those over to the new machine as well. This board is a Gigabyte Z77X UD3H, which I've actually been really happy with this board. I always use Gigabyte boards if I can, and this one has been no disappointment. We're going to go ahead and strip the cooler off of here. We won't be reusing that. We have a Noctua that we're going to be using. This is the Corsair power supply that I'm using. It's an AX850. This is my SSD, the Samsung 840 Pro, and then I have, I actually need to get another 500 gig because I use these for when I'm recording YouTube videos and stuff, so I want to get a second one of these, and then a 640 that I put all my programs and whatnot on, and then our 2 optical drives. So the first thing we need to do is go ahead and strip the cooler off of this board, which might have been easier to do while it was still mounted in the machine, but there's a little nut, like a socket that comes with the cooler. I still have some of these around, so all you do is you put that on and use a screwdriver. You could use a regular socket, but I don't want to go get my socket, so I had this handy. Just going to do that. Pretty much just get all 4 of them started here. And I'm supporting the cooler with my other hand. So now that those are all started, we can get rid of the screwdriver and oops. Now I probably will reuse this cooler in another machine later. It's a nice cooler, but I want to get a little bit extra cooling out of this if I can. That's not great that that fell like that. I really don't want that scratching the backside of the board. Gravity is your friend. I'm not really using it wisely here. So we can just pull that out now. Disconnect the fan. And I'll set that aside to clean up later. So there's our CPU in all of its goopy glory. So I need to get something to clean that up before we apply more thermal compound and get the new cooler out. So I took an old lint-free cloth and some Q-tips, and I used a little bit of rubbing alcohol, clean the surface of the CPU up. Now we don't want to touch that because I don't want any oils from my fingers getting on there and messing up the bond between the new cooler and the CPU. There's the memory, of course. Now there are a few other parts that we're reusing. The first would be my Radeon 7970. It's pretty dusty. I'm going to clean this thing up before we put it back in too. And then this is a very old sound card I've had for many years. It's a Sound Blaster Live Xfinity X. Starts with an X. I don't remember what they even call it. Does it say on here somewhere? The model number is SB0460. The only problem it has is it doesn't have modern HD outputs for sound on the front panel, so I won't be able to use those, which is kind of a bummer, but I really don't care that much because the difference between the onboard audio and using a real sound card is really big, and even though this thing is probably 6 or 7 years old, it still works really well, and I haven't found the need to replace it yet. Another thing I always do, since I'm throwing parts in anyway, I want to install an Intel Pro, this is a Gigabit Ethernet card. I want to install that as well because I have the machine taken apart and I don't like to use the onboard LAN. Like I said earlier, the onboard LAN's been having some issues, so I want to go ahead and utilize something a little bit better. So I'm going to get the new cooler out and we'll start looking at how to set that up. So this is the cooler I've decided on. It's a Noctua NHU12S. If I can show you the difference between the two here real quick. This is the Cooler Master Hyper 12, I think this is a 520, and then this is the Noctua. It's a lot bigger, but as you can see, it's really not any taller. Doesn't stand up any further really. Probably slightly taller, but it's not a big issue. The heatsink itself is much larger, and the fans are like 30 millimeters larger. So it only comes with the one fan installed, but I do have a second one that we're gonna install as well. So let's take a look at the accessories here. Is this the 11? Doesn't say. I think it is the 1155 kit here. So I have this big beefy back plate. This is going to get attached. It's a lot easier, I think, than the Cooler Master system. This gets attached to the back, and then this basically just these brackets get attached here, and we tighten it down. So it's easier to work with, I really think. So let's get this moved out of the way. Alright, so we've got the back plate in place. There's these black, they're hard plastic. I guess they're kind of insulator spacers. So we want to place those accordingly. Now, there are these metal, got dust on it from the other computer. There's these metal braces that basically just rest on top of this. I'm not sure which holes to use. There's two sets of holes. Looks like the inside set. And then there's some thumb screws that go on top. So this is kind of cool because this system is used in a lot of Noctua coolers, which makes it easier to swap things out. So you kind of want to tighten that fairly well. There's a lot of pressure on this, so you know, this is probably where there's more pressure than anywhere else in the entire computer. So you want to make sure that the cooler doesn't wobble around. The more force you can put down on the cooler onto the CPU, the better the heat transfer. So there is, like I said, quite a lot of force here, and I forgot to put in my little bracket. That's not going to work. And you want to make sure, of course, that screw is facing up. And of course, whenever you're working around the motherboard with a screwdriver, you want to be careful. Magnetic screwdrivers are best, especially when we're installing the motherboard, because it makes it easier to not drop screws. Those thumb screws weren't going anywhere, but you want to be careful not to scratch things up. Alright, so normally at this point I would probably install the cooler right now, but I'm kind of thinking about it and looking at the room in here, and I kind of feel like I want to install the board and then do the cooler. Just because of the size, I don't really want to be usually I would move the motherboard by the cooler, but I really don't want to do that with this. So I'm going to move some of the stuff out of the way so I can get the case flipped down and we can get the board lined up in the case. Alright, so the first step here is just going to be to replace this I/O shield on the back of the case. It's not fun if you forget to do that. And they just kind of snap in with pressure. There's not much to that. Now, it's pretty important here that we get all these wires tucked in somewhere where they're not going to get under the board and get stuck or something stupid like that. And then the next thing we really need to be aware of here is where these standoffs are, which is unfortunate that they're black on this one. I kind of don't like that. But we want to make sure that there are standoffs wherever there's a hole in the motherboard, and that there are no standoffs where there is no hole in the motherboard, because you can short things out. Now this is a fairly standard sized motherboard, so I believe there's a standoff on all three of those. There's one there. Yeah, I think all the standoffs are lined up, but if anything I have to check right here. But I'm going to pull the board off and double check. So we have, I always count, we have 3, 6, 9 different screw holes, and we have 9 standoffs. This has the, I really like this in Corsair. They have a, one of these has a metal stud. It doesn't take a screw actually, and it helps hold the board in when you're actually installing it, because there's actually some spring tension from the I/O shield. So I think I have to push it in a little to get the screw going. I don't know if these are coarse or fine threaded. Guess we'll see. They're coarse threaded. Once you get a couple in, the other ones are easier. Sometimes you have to push on the board still, so I always go for the edge first. Just kind of makes sense to me. So we're only going to be using 8 screws on this particular board. Now you really don't want to kill these things, because you don't want to crack your board or something like that. I've never had that happen, but I guess it theoretically could. So just make them tight. They don't have to be ridiculous. It's not, you know, we're not trying to make this thing waterproof or something like that. They're just kind of holding things in place. There is a fair amount of weight on this, so with, you know, lever force from the cooler. So we do want to make sure that they're all in place and that they're all fairly tight. And magnetic screwdrivers really do help at this time, because you don't want to be dropping screws and having to fish them out and stuff, and it's just a lot easier to have a magnetic tip screwdriver. For some reason that screw felt like it was cross-threaded, but then it just went. I don't know if there was something coarse in the threads on the case standoffs or what, but I believe we just have the 2 at the top after this one. Come on, magnet. So this board already looks a little happier in this case to me. A little bit more room. It's not hugely different, but I think it's going to be better. There was some thermal compound that I couldn't quite get off the CPU there without removing it, and the pins are so fragile on these boards that I really didn't want to, you know, take the risk of getting it off for really no reason. It's not going to hurt anything being in there, so I'm just going to let it be. Alright. For some reason that feels like, there it goes. Felt like it wasn't tightening, but it did. So let's look for our fan headers. So I ended up having to get an extension out and just route this up this way. I'll do the cable management later, but we'll just tuck it up here for now and figure that out. The header's all the way up there, which is kind of unfortunate and stupid, but it's where it is. And so let's get that cooler mounted. Well, actually, I think I want to get the power supply in first. The cooler is probably going to be in the way for getting the CPU power hooked up. So I think we're going to put in the power supply next. So this is a modular power supply, which means that I just took all the cables off for simplicity's sake, fitting room in there. I know I set the black screws aside here. Alright, so I got the black screws for the power supply out here. Go ahead and drive this thing in. It's pretty simple. It's just like any other power supply. Just have 4 screws on it. Hardest part's always just getting the power supply to sit where you want at first. And just like with anything else, we just want to put in the screws basically finger tight, not drive them all the way in, just to get the screw holes started. And then we'll tighten them down all at once pretty much. And again, we're not sealing this against water or something. You just want to make them tight so the thing doesn't rattle around and come loose. But there's no need to go hulking the thing or something, you know. Just needs to not move, really. For some reason this one is cross-threading. Alright, so before we get too far into things, I just want to get the main power hooked up here. So this is one connector here for that. It looks like it's got the 24-pin connector, and just attaches down here. I don't really know why it comes in 2 parts on that end like that. They do it all sorts of different ways with different power supplies, but it doesn't really matter. And unfortunately there's no grommets on this case, which is moderately irritating. I like it better if there's grommets, but you don't really need them. The clip on these always goes towards the outside of the motherboard. That's a good way to remember that. And like I said, we'll deal with the cable management kind of all in one fell swoop. So I need a CPU power, which this is for video card. We'll set that aside because we will need that. And I assume this is PCIe. So that's for a video card. Looks like this one is CPU. Does it say? Well, it looks like a CPU. So this gets attached right there. And most cases, including this one, have a nifty little cutout here. So we can come on up in. And unfortunately, I kind of have to twist this around. A lot of times these are split in 2, which is moderately irritating. Because some boards only need 4 pins, or even if it's an older computer, no pins for the CPU. But we need 8 for this one. And just like the main 24-pin one, this the clips go towards the outside of the board. That was a fair amount of a struggle there. Alright, so that's all clipped in. And kind of just pulling that taut back there a little bit. So that takes care of the main power connectors that we'll have to do up here. So at this point I want to go ahead and put in the actual cooling unit, because that's probably going to be the next struggle. So this is our cooler. It still has the plastic on to keep the contaminants from your finger from messing things up. I need to find my accessories box. Alright, so we have our accessories box here. This has all the goodies we're going to need to actually attach this. Well, that opened conveniently. I thought I was going to need scissors. So we have some thermal compound. I'm just going to use that. People get all bent out of shape about thermal compound, but it's pretty much all the same stuff, so I wouldn't worry too much. Low noise adapter we're not going to be using. Clips for another fan, which we will be using. And then a high quality case badge. I'm not going to be using that because I don't really do case badges. Sometimes I'll put the processor case badge on, but that's it. So I'm also going to probably want a Y connector, but we'll see if the other fan comes with that. So we're going to be adding a second fan to the cooler here. It's the same one that's already on there, the 120mm. And we're going to be wanting, I already dumped all the contents of its box in here, so we need a Y adapter. I always just pull these stickers off because it looks cleaner without them. So get that off. Now we're going to be doing both fans obviously want to go in the same direction, so we're blowing air through. So we need this side to face out, which means just kind of place it vaguely in the same orientation. Set this thing down. So basically I'm just hooking this through the screw holes, pulling it up. Easier said than done. There we go. So that just fits all nice and good in there now. Get the other side done. Just like that. Did I put those on backwards though? I sure as heck did. I was confused. Mistakes happen. Not a big deal. Flip that bad boy around. Fortunately, these are really easy to work with, actually. Alright, so those are all aligned perfectly. Now, we want the airflow to go towards the rear of the case, so that means we want it facing this way. I'm also going to tidy this up a little bit down here and get my Y connector hooked up. So just wipe down your CPU, make sure it's still nice and clean. You don't want to put on a ridiculous amount of this stuff, so it's a grain of, they'll say anything between a pea and rice. I usually go more the pea sized, I guess. And let's go ahead and remove, I actually need to remove both fans to put this on though. I just had those fans test fitted. So I'm just going to pull the fans and set them aside, because we need to be able to get the screwdriver in there, and the screws are exactly where the fans are. So probably going to be less fun to put those fans on the second time while it's all installed. So my tripod doesn't want to stand up high enough to have a good angle on this, but basically we're just lining this up, laying the case down so we have gravity working for us, and you just want to get those screws to start biting on each side before you tighten it down. They're spring loaded, so you kind of have to push down on them a bit, and they're both started. I'm actually going to use their screwdriver because it has a longer handle than mine. And I'm just going to run these till they're pretty tight on one side. Give it a couple turns. Try to keep the pressure even. Alright, there we go. So stand this back up. And work against gravity again, which is always fun. So I'm going to grab one of these fans. Doesn't really matter which one. This one I have decreed will be, well, I guess it does matter. It's going to stay as the back fan. And I'm going to try to get this header, before I get the fans put in, I'm going to get this little header plugged in here. The CPU fan header is way up here. And I'm just going to set that there. Try to get it out of the way of what I'm doing. And that is not a lot of clearance between the memory and the fan, but it doesn't need a lot. It's enough. That's what counts, I guess. Alright, so we got one fan fitted. I'm going to run the fan power down underneath the fan to this header. And we got to get our other fans out. And mission accomplished. So we just need to plug in the power cable. It's actually relatively clean and out of the way up there too, so that's good. Probably tuck that out, the slack out through the top there. Alright, so that's pretty much takes care of all of our cooling for this build. And I'm pretty happy with how that looks. That looks like it's going to do a better job than the previous cooling system that I had. Not that there was much wrong with that, but this should work better. So how much room do we have? Do we have room for this Intel here? Yeah, I think we want to put the Ethernet card up above the graphics card if it will fit. So let's pull this off here. And it's a good idea to always keep these expansion card covers somewhere so you have them if you want them later, because you probably will. Alright, so this is our Intel NIC. And easy as that. Don't really like using thumb screws in here because they're big and bulky. Kind of almost want to take these out and replace them with just normal screws. Because I actually like kind of tightening these down to a fairly ridiculous amount. Alrighty, let's pull off the next two for the graphics card. Alright, so let's get this big boy in there. A lot more room feeling good about that. Just go ahead and give it a push, and we're good. I put both screws in when I put in a card just to give it a little extra support. Can't really hurt. So, plus in this case these are kind of special screws, so it keeps me from losing the screw. They don't work well with my magnet though, I'll tell you that. It's a little too heavy. The magnet does not like them. And then we have to hook up power to this, but I'm going to do the sound card first. It looks like that PCI. Which one of these actually lines up with the PCI? Just trying to make sure it's seated all the way so we don't end up having troubles trying to use it. I'd rather not take this whole thing down again. So now we need to worry about power for the graphics card, and I believe this goes in this row on the top. Yes, it does. And then it's kind of a long cable for how far it has to go, but that's kind of a shame. So this card actually utilizes both of these 8-pin connectors. So cable management here will be a little bit tricky just because those go kind of right there. I guess I could run them around the back. I probably will do that actually. Run them around the... It's kind of pointless I guess, but just to keep clutter down a little bit. It's not ideal. Just have them come up and turn here. Alright guys, we got the video card in, we got all the power hooked up, we got all the front umbilical for the power switches and whatnot hooked up, the reset switch, USB 3 is plugged in, everything's good to go. So now we're just going to go ahead and get the drive set up. I already took the liberty of just installing this in here. Basically there's just 4 screws that go in and the drive slides right in. And as far as the normal platter drives go, there's these, you know, normally you put a screw in there. There's these little metal tabs in here. You just kind of line up those and then you bend the plastic and fold it over and it's good to go. I am going to put a couple screws in just because, I don't know, I'm not really into toolless stuff. I usually secure things with at least a screw or two, so I mean, it's nice that these come out nice and easy. But once it's out, it's not a big deal for me to just take a screwdriver and pull the screws out. I like to make things a little bit sturdier. So this is the 640, so it's going to go with the second drive. Really dusty on the back. Dust that a little bit. Yuck. And then I already did that with the 500 gig. I need to get another 500 gig, so these can run in a mirrored setting here. So I'll do that at some point where I have 2 mirrored 500s, but not going to do that today. So that takes care of everything there. We need to get the drives going, and the optical drives. Simple enough. So just going to put in the Blu-ray one first. Pull this little tab here, and that just slides in, and then somehow it's supposed to lock. There it goes. Why is that? Alright, I guess it's in position. And then we have the DVD burner. Proving a little bit challenging. There it goes. Alright, so that's good to go too. Make sure that's in quite right. And actually, those don't really wobble too much, so I don't think I'm going to bother putting in any screws. That seems pretty secure, actually. The reason I wouldn't want to put screws in here really is because if I do have to replace one of these drives, I have to take off both of the side panels, and I'd rather not do that. I did decide not to install the hot swappable hard drive bay here. The reason being, actually, I'm going to put that on another machine that's going to be kind of specifically used for repairing hard drives and stuff. I actually do a fair amount of that. So I'm going to have a machine that's kind of dedicated to that, and that's going to be a different machine. So that takes care of all of the hardware installation. The only thing remaining really is to hook up power and to hook up the SATA connectors. So that's all of our power for our hard drives there. I'm going to try to find a longer one for the optical drives. So unfortunately the only one that I could find right now was the same length, another 2 drive connectors. So I'm going to just run this way. It's not really ideal for my airflow and stuff, but I suppose it'll do well enough. So that's, you know, doesn't really matter. It's just one cable. It's better than it was. So now it's time to route our SATA, and I hopefully have a port where I can reach through here. Yeah, the SATA connectors are all right there. So that works out perfectly. I can see them all right there. I don't know if you guys will be able to see them, but I'll be able to reach in and connect my SATA cables. Alright, so I did some rudimentary cable management. Hopefully it will be good enough to get the job done. Let's see if we can get this side panel back on. Not squishing things too much. It's always hard near the drives. Might help to use gravity on our side here. You don't want to have to push it down so much that the case is warping or anything, but finally finagled everything into fitting. Like I said, I kind of got spoiled by the space in the Antec case. It's a little tighter on this one. At least it seemed that way. Definitely not quite as nice. It's a good case, it's just a little harder to work with in a few different ways. A lot heavier now that it has a machine in it. Now this side should go on easy as can be, because nothing in the way. There we go. Alright, so that pretty much takes care of this build. Let's take a look at the machine here all ready to go. So I'm going to go hook it up, and if you guys enjoyed this video, please leave me a like, subscribe for more, and I will see you guys later. Thanks for watching.